It is my pleasure to introduce our guest this evening. We've just been so fortunate. Our Community Engagement Committee has been working so hard. Maybe you were here in March when we celebrated Women's History Month. Rochelle Riley, who's now the Director of Cultural Events in the city of Detroit, former Free Press columnist, was here. And really more speakers from on different topics are going to come. And I don't want to tell you too much because I know Maria likes to explain and share that information as we wind up. So we are very grateful to have Ron Zimmerman and Katie Fahey join us as they've been traveling all across the state of Michigan, at least this week, right? So Katie, you might know Katie Fahey, and maybe you've heard her before. She was the founder and executive director of Voters, Not Politicians, where she led over 14,000 volunteers across Michigan to pass a ballot proposal with 61% of the vote that made political gerrymandering illegal. Yeah, all right. Currently, Katie is the executive director of The People, an organization that seeks to address the root causes of government ineffectiveness and aims to reduce the unproductive effects of the current two-party political system. So another time, we need to hear about The People. And joining her is Ron. Ron Zimmerman is one of the directors of Rank My Vote, a nonpartisan, grassroots, all-volunteer nonprofit whose mission is to partner with leaders and voters across Michigan to promote, implement, and achieve the benefits of ranked choice voting in Michigan in local elections. The ultimate goal is to change to ranked choice voting for statewide offices in the state of Michigan. And I'll just let you know, Katie's got to run. She's got a flight, but she's going to stay with us at least till for at least an hour, correct? And I'll let you decide who's coming up to the podium first, or maybe both of you.
Thank you, and thanks for this opportunity to come talk to you. It's talking to the League is always great. You always have very educated folks about voting when you come to the League of Women Voters, and that's always nice because sometimes we spend a lot of time with ranked choice voting, just educating folks on just the basic premise of voting concepts and stuff. That it's great to talk to a group here that gets that already. Just wanted to take a few seconds before we got into ranked choice, and Katie jumps up here to talk a little about what we are. Jerry just mentioned a couple of the key things, mentioned what our missions are, and I think having mentors like we've had since we started 5 years ago, Katie, Jamie Lyons, Eddie, most of our value propositions of our organization, so on, are very much similar to Voters Not Politicians. We very much try to stay nonpartisan. I've been a volunteer leader of this group for almost 4 years now. So we've never really paid anyone to do this. So we really try to stay grassroots, stay volunteer in what we achieve. I can't hold back from starting this presentation by saying we've had some pretty good success so far. It's still at a local level. We haven't really got aggressive going statewide per se yet, but we're 5 for 5. So we have 5 cities passed out of 5 so far. So we're happy and that we've had that kind of success. But part of the reason why these communities were chosen is that since our beginning, these are pretty much where the pockets of our volunteers have been. This is have been the strength of our organization. We have tried to pass this in communities where we have a lot of local support. Like there's really nothing strategic that's been about this, because if we were strategic, we probably would have gone out for Detroit or something bigger sooner, right? We really have tried to focus where we have volunteer support and really passion to want to change this and implement it. And real quickly, since 2019, we've had over 550 volunteers come in and out of our organization. We have over 8,000 subscribers, so between email and social media, we have a fair amount of people following us and what we're doing. And we've given over 350 presentations about ranked choice voting. Some of them, a lot of them on Zoom during the COVID time period. But that sort of just quick summary of just kind of who we are, give you an idea of who you're talking to in terms of how we think about approaching this. So I'll turn it over to Katie to talk a little bit about just why do we need ranked choice? Why is today's system so flawed?
Yeah, awesome. All right, let me know if you can hear me. I'm pretty loud. Okay, all right. So I really, Ron is very humble, but we met each other during the redistricting campaign, and we're fighting to end gerrymandering together. But as soon as victory came, he was like, we got to talk about ranked choice voting. And has been a dog with a bone, on a bone, whatever that phrase is, ever since, really, and helped me understand. Because at first I was like, I think I like this idea, but I need to really learn more about it and understand what it can do for our state. And him and his team have been really critical in doing that. So just thanks, Ron. And we'll be kind of going back and forth talking about all of this today. I did want to start out, though, just asking for folks who are in here, are you happy with the state of politics? All right, so I wanted to take about 1 to 2 minutes if you could just turn to somebody who's near you and talk about why you're not happy, some elements of why. That will help kick off our presentation. So I'm starting the timer now. Please turn to somebody and talk about why you are not happy. What about our current state of politics? All right, I'll give you about 20 more seconds. Wrap up your thought. Okay. Can I have a couple people, if you don't mind, just 1 or 2 words about what you talked about? Why? What's wrong with the state of politics? No. What did you say?
All the women's issues.
All the women's issues not being addressed? Is that what you mean by that, or?
Being overlooked, being trampled, being abused. It's bad.
So over 51% of our country is women, and yet women's issues are being ignored, is what we're saying. Okay. What else? What else is wrong? Problem? Yeah.
I think it's become a self-serving profession.
Self-serving profession. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anything else about our current political system you don't like or think is broken? Yeah.
Congress isn't moving.
Congress isn't moving, not productive. We are not actually dealing with issues. My parents and I were just talking about this right before I came, about how we keep talking about immigration, and yet have we ever tried to actually be addressing it at the national level? I don't think since I've been alive we've done much, but yeah.
Well, actually, there was a bill. Yes.
Well, that's true, yes.
Some people didn't like it, so they're...
Because of partisanship, right? Polarization. You can't work across the aisle anymore. Yeah. Yeah. Was there another thought?
That was my thought.
Polarization?
Polarization, they're not talking anymore.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, in the back. Campaign spending and lobbyists. So our politicians being more accountable to somebody else and not actually to us, the voters. Not focused on the issues that actually impact our communities. Yes. Any other thoughts before? Yeah, go ahead.
Current people in government who really want the government to be dysfunctional.
Yes. So there is incentive to actually make government not work. And that's how you stay in government. Yeah.
You're going to like this.
Yeah, yes, I think you will like this presentation then. So one of the things I always tried to mention when we were working on the redistricting campaign, the anti-gerrymander campaign, is unfortunately there isn't just one solution that fixes everything, but you can start to take some of these reform issues and you start to see changes in the system. You start to see those incentives shifted just a little bit to make it harder for people to do the wrong thing all the time, or shift that money, power, and all of that. So anyways, part of what ranked choice voting does is it starts to address some of the things that you guys mentioned. Actually, I think maybe all of them. We're in a presidential election right now. Not sure if you guys knew that. I'm guessing you did since it's a Wednesday night and you're hanging out here talking about voting. But what you might be hearing people talk about is spoiler candidates. So people who are not Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and people might want to vote for somebody else. And so everybody's trying to say, well, but if you vote for that way, you'll actually get somebody that you don't like getting elected, right? Which is a real concern. It's happened before. But that is also telling people you shouldn't vote for who you actually like. It's trying to limit the amount of choices and options we have as voters. Ranked choice voting tries to do something about that. It tries to stop telling people you're wasting your vote by voting for who you actually like the best, which is, I think, an exciting option. One of the other things that you sometimes see with the current status quo of how we vote, and how we vote right now, has everybody voted? I don't know. If you haven't, it's okay. Yeah, I've seen most hands. Okay, so you go and you vote for one person, usually, if it's a single member district, and you only put who your top choice is, and then whoever happens to get the most votes wins. So here's an example of maybe 4 candidates who are running, and one person has 30% of the vote, but the other person has 29, 20, and 21. Well, the person who wins has 30% of the vote. So 30% of the people put them as their first candidate. That is not a majority. Might not even be reflective at all of what the majority of people in that community want. But the 3 candidates who lean more purple, maybe focused on women's issues, ended up splitting the vote because they were all really great candidates running. People had different reasons for liking them. And yet you had somebody who is on the orange, maybe not putting women's issues first, or whatever your topic is, who ends up winning. That's one of the problems with our current system. And the current system, when you're only being asked to really vote for one person, incentivizes politicians, like you were mentioning, to want to do things that a lot of us don't think is productive, as well as like Congress not being as productive. So it incentivizes people basically trying to convince you that voting for anybody else besides me is going to be evil. It's going to send our country in the completely wrong direction. It is life or death if you vote for anybody who isn't me. I don't have any incentive to help you actually understand the issues I care about. I'm just trying to villainize the person that I'm running against, so you will never vote for them. It also means that we are asking people to have to choose from really limited options. And it incentivizes gridlock, too, because so many of our elections happen in the primary. So your district might end up, and most congressional districts across the country aren't competitive. It means a Democrat or a Republican is going to win at the end of the day. So depending on which Democrat or which Republican in the primary ends up winning, they're going to be the candidate, because you just have more Democrats or more Republicans living in that community. Well, when you're only running really in a primary, who shows up to a primary? Well, voters that aren't from the other side of the aisle, but also voters who aren't independents. And also it tends to be like a very small percentage of voters who are most involved with party politics. There's nothing wrong with being involved with party politics, but it is not the majority of our country. The majority of people are not one of those extremes, yet it often feels like everyone's really extreme because our current political system makes it feel that way. Because if I then work with somebody on the orange team and I'm on the purple team, during that primary race, the TV ads you're going to see are going to be, well, this Democrat actually worked with a Republican, so don't vote for them because that's scary. Or this Republican actually worked with the Democrat, so don't you dare vote for them because they aren't a good Democrat or they aren't a good Republican. I'm guessing you've heard things like this in one way or another. And it doesn't actually have to be this way. There are other countries who figured this out a long time before we did, and America is starting to catch on. The fastest growing reform right now is actually ranked choice voting, so we're going to hop into that. And it really focuses on negative campaigns. I hate negative campaigns. I'm guessing a lot of you do too, but it just makes politics completely depressing when instead we could be talking about what is a new vision for our community? How are we going to actually start changing things instead of just here's all of the bad things and again, all the reasons you should be scared of somebody who isn't me who's running. So for our current system, and I started already explaining this a little bit, theoretically, if 70% of a community likes more of the purple side, the purple candidate, instead of the orange candidate, you would think which side would win? The purple side, right? But actually, a lot of times it isn't. We are having kind of our votes be divided because we want more nuance in our options. So this is that one graphic a little bit larger. You know, if you have, again, 3 candidates who maybe all want better child care options in our country, but one of them wants it to be completely paid for by the government, one wants it to be completely paid for by an employer, and the other wants it like half and half, let's say. But then Team Orange is like, nope, we want 0 child care options, right? Well, you probably like the 3 potentially, depending on what side you are on the issue. I just had a baby, so that's why that's top of my mind. So I would personally like the purple side. And maybe I like, you know, the candidate that's saying it should be a mixed payment the most. But I would much rather have either of the other 2 candidates over the orange candidate, because this is my top issue, because it's impacting my income, and I can't afford to work without having my child cared for in some way. So why then do I have to feel guilty when talking to people about who I want to vote for because they're saying, well, that person isn't as electable? Did you know that men are more likely to be elected than women, as an example? So don't vote for that person because they aren't qualified enough, or whatever that is. That's what ranked choice voting has the opportunity to change. And as it's been implemented in communities, you see this over and over again. All those candidates, you start seeing more people of color elected. You start seeing more women be elected. You see more younger and newer to politics people being elected. And it's because they no longer are scaring everybody away. People actually are willing to vote for those folks. They just need a system that actually lets them do that with confidence and that it reflects the community. Yes, okay. So all the rest are spoilers. And Ron shared this really great story with me where, you know, he's talking about how the system, that a lot of people call those candidates who are running spoilers. They call, you know, the people who care about childcare, and all 3 of them want to run. You know, people say, don't run because you're going to spoil the election. And that there's a 10-year-old in the back of one of his presentations who actually said, sounds like the system is the spoiler, not the candidates. Which I think is brilliant, because that is true. Why would we be discouraging people who are excited and have new ideas from running for office, telling them they're going to ruin it by actually trying? I heard a lot of that during the redistricting campaign. Don't do this. You're just going to ruin it for other people if you try. And what ends up happening when you can get more competition is voters get more issues that they care about being listened to. So one example, combining a couple of the ideas I was talking about. So redistricting reform worked in a lot of ways, like how people voted ended up being how people got elected. But in Michigan, we lost a congressional seat, and that pretty much came out of Detroit. Our population didn't grow as fast as some other states, so we used to have 14 congressional members, now we have 13. So Congressional District 13, for the first time, didn't have an incumbent in years. And that is a district that is primarily over Detroit. And so you had 9 candidates running. 8 of those candidates were black, and 1 was not black. And not that people just vote on color, but you might assume different people with different experiences from the community. The person who ended up winning with, I believe it was 28% of the vote, was the only non-black candidate. If we had ranked choice voting, would that have been the case? I don't know. Because people might have still liked this candidate, they can run for their own merits. But in a community that is primarily a community of color with black people, the other candidates, the next 2, I know this slide's hard to read, came in with 23 and then 16% of the vote, a man and then a female. I wonder if people would have voted differently. And that's where you start to see, like, maybe we could get better results that reflect the community if this looked different. And you need multiple types of reform in order to get the system working properly. You don't just have a silver bullet just because we dealt with redistricting. If we deal with ranked choice voting, it won't be a silver bullet. It won't completely get rid of money in politics, but it does start to have a better impact in that way. So how does it actually work? So on our normal ballot, you would get to vote for 1 candidate, and that's it, and then you're done, right? So that is simple. And this is from the League of Women Voters of Maine. Maine has passed ranked choice voting at the state level. So this is an example ballot from that. So now you would actually get the options of who do you want to put as your first choice, and you would put either candidate A, candidate B, or candidate C in that first column. I can go back to that. So you'd put your first choice. Then you put, okay, who do I like next? If you really hate both the candidates, you are not forced to choose a second option. You can just say, nope, I only want to put my vote towards that one person. And then you can put who you would like third. And then Ron will explain kind of how that works in a real life example.
Sure.
Right now. Yeah.
Yeah, how ranked choice, the powers of ranked choice voting came pretty evident in the very first election Maine used ranked choice voting for. So I'll walk you through this example. And so Maine, one of the reasons why Maine passed ranked choice voting was when they say there's 50% of the people in Maine that are independent, they really are independent, like much more than we think here. Like we have a lot of people not registered with a party, but a lot of independents, quote unquote, here still, primarily vote one way or the other 90% of the time. That's different in Maine. Maine has a lot of independents, and a lot of independents run for big offices. And they always felt like for years, for decades in Maine, they keep getting winners of elections with 38, 37, 41% of the vote. A lot of the independents are like, we keep getting candidates that really aren't representing a massive, demographic of our state. So here's a classic example, and you see how the ballot looks, looks very similar to this. There was a Republican Democrat that came out of the primaries, and there were two independents that were also on the ballot. So let's look at how the vote came in, and we'll describe how ranked choice works. So if you look at the black line on the far right of the screen, you need, at the beginning of the election, you need 144,000 votes in order to get elected. That's 50% of the vote. That's what a candidate needs to win this office. In the first round, if someone has 50%, it's over. It's just like today. You don't need to go to the ranking. You don't need to incorporate the ranking. It's over. It's just like it is today. So, because that's the goal, is to get a 50% majority winner. But in this case, just like in almost every Maine, race for Senate, for their district representative in D.C., their governor, they all look like this, right? Nobody ever gets 50%, right? So in this case, no one got 50%. So how does it work? What comes next is that you look to see who got the least. So William got the least number of votes in the first round. So technically, he can't win, right? The lowest can't win, so he gets eliminated from the contest. So William gets eliminated. And what you do is you look at every voter that voted for Will, you pull out their ballot, and you say, who did they vote for second? Who is their second choice? So in other words, if Will wasn't in the election, where would that person's vote have gone? Right? So you can see by the colors, it gets divvied up. Those totals get added to the candidates to the second choice for Will, and you look to see, does someone have 50% yet? And likely when you eliminate the smaller candidates first in ranked choice, you probably isn't going to impact much. They have a lot of low number of votes, so that's not going to probably impact right away. And that was the case here, that Will's voters didn't end up overall determining or getting someone to 50%. So now you just continue that process. So now you look at Tiffany, the other independent, and you look at, okay, who did Tiffany's voters vote for second? And their second place choices are then pulled out. She's now eliminated from the contest. Those votes are then redistributed, and now you have a 50% winner. A couple of things that I want to point out, because I want to explain this, both a couple more things on the mechanics, but I want to explain the why too. Like in this particular election, why did Jared overtake the first place vote getter, right? So a couple of things I want to point out. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Watch the black line on the right-hand side of this when you start. You'll notice that as the two rounds continue, watch what happens to that black line, right? So the amount of votes required to get to 50% comes in, right? It reduces. And it reduces by, do you see the little box now at the bottom that wasn't there in the beginning called none? Those are called exhausted ballots. Right? So that's the example Katie was saying. You don't have to rank. So if you're in a hurry and you're in the voter's booth and you want Will, and that's all you don't want anybody else, you just want Will, you put your vote down for Will, but because you didn't rank, when he got eliminated, your voting voice was eliminated from the process. So when you think about it, in order to get someone to 50% and guarantee statistically you can get someone to, mathematically get someone to 50%, your denominator gets reduced by the amount of people that have said, I don't want to rank, I want to be eliminated. Okay.
I think there's probably a better way to describe that. Their voice doesn't get eliminated. It just doesn't, because it's already counted in the two big winners here. It doesn't get added again.
Well, in this case, that's not true. In this case, an exhausted ballot is where they didn't decide to reallocate their vote to somebody else.
But their original vote is still there.
Their original vote is still with Will, but Will's been eliminated. So for the active ballots that are still in process, because some have been eliminated, that denominator in the 50% calculation goes down. That's how mathematically in ranked choice you always are guaranteed to get a 50% winner, right? So it's just as if Will, and using the example, this is people sometimes call ranked choice voting instant runoff. So if this was an actual physical runoff, what you're actually saying here is Will's voters voted the first time, but when there was a runoff, they didn't come back out and vote again, right? And that's what ranked choice tries to eliminate with runoff voting. We're trying to get rid of runoff voting because runoff voting historically has been very discriminatory down south. The part of the reason they want to bring people out to vote again is they know that lower income people that have a hard enough time trying to find time to get off of work and go vote will likely not come out, or 5, 6, 7% of them won't come out and vote the second time. But in ranked choice voting, you're going to get a 50% winner, but you don't have to bring everybody back to the polls. This process eliminates that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in some of our later slides. So that's something I want to point out, just to kind of explain how it works, right? The candidates with the lesser amount of votes are eliminated and their votes are redistributed. The incentive that makes this work is that as an independent if you're an independent voter, right, and you've voted in this plurality system for decades, you're incentivized to rank, right? The voters that will vote for the less popular candidate, for lack of a better term, right, that's in an election, they don't want to have to waste their vote. They want to vote for the candidate they like. But the reason why they will rank, because people worry, will people really rank in this process? Well, the ones that want to keep their voice in that process longer to determine who wins are incentivized to rank. They're the ones that have felt disenfranchised for decades, right? So they're the ones that love this system. They're the ones that are embracing the system the most because now they realize, wow, I can finally vote for my independent candidate. I don't have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I can vote for a libertarian or a Green Party or independent because now I can, as my second choice, vote for the Republican or the Democrat or the other independent in this case, right? So that's the one thing I want to point out about this. The second thing that's important to understand what happened here, Bruce, people were strategists that know about ranked choice voting were telling Bruce, don't negative campaign. The worst thing that can hurt you in a ranked choice election is to negative campaign, because you need second and third place votes to get over that threshold, to get past that black bar. You need second and third place votes. If you're going out there every day for 3 months on the campaign trail, telling all the voters how Tiffany's the devil and how Will is going to destroy Maine if they get elected, you see some of the stuff that goes out 2 weeks before an election. It's like, it blows my mind. The other candidates with hell's fire, behind them. How could you possibly vote for this person? People in Maine or anywhere, any of us, we don't want that. I want to hear what issues are most important to you. Why do you think you're most qualified to solve those issues? So I can make an educated vote when I go. That's what I want to hear about. I want you telling me why you're the best candidate and deserve my vote. After this election, negative campaigning in Maine almost went away because they learned from Bruce's mistake. You don't win in ranked choice by negative campaigning. You can't get over that threshold. Now, maybe if you're in a district that's, 80% Republican, go for it, because you probably won't, you're probably going to win, right? But when you're in a tight race, which many of them, at least in the country, used to be, when you're in a tight race, and even if it's not for a big race like this, just for mayor, and there's 8 people running for mayor, you don't want to see candidates disparaging other candidates. You want to be convinced why you will run the city better than somebody else, right? So that's a big takeaway for ranked choice voting, right? This example really shows, A, how it works. So now you can start thinking about how does that change, behaviors. That's what we're trying to change in this system. Incentives. We're trying to change incentives for how candidates run. Try to change their behaviors. You change the system. You change the behavior. We're trying to think about how we change media and change all kinds of other things to get better candidates. Just change the system. When the incentives are different, you're going to get different behaviors. So let's talk about the overall benefits of ranked choice voting. We really want to drive home the split voting. So I'm going to talk a lot about that, what happened in New York City, and how they solved the Detroit issue that Katie just showed you. But let's talk about the benefits for ranked choice voting and how they're driven off of what I just said, right? So the secret sauce of ranked choice voting is that 50%. It sounds minor. It sounds subtle. Big. Everyone running in a race, when they know they can't win just anymore with placating to their base and just getting enough of their base out to vote for them and get 29% and win, when they know they have to get 50, it changes behaviors. So one thing I'll dive in with the Detroit example and the New York example, so I'll talk about this in a little more detail before, but one of the things we always talk about is when you get rid of split voting, which ranked choice does, you get more equitable representation. No more disenfranchised communities where 72%, like in District 13, are black, and the more black candidates to run, the actual less chance the black candidate actually wins. Or if you're in a Hispanic community, and the Hispanics in New York were saying, every year we run more candidates, we can't win. Well, in plurality voting, the more candidates you run, it's true, the less chance you have of winning. You're going to split your demographic, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that when I go through the New York City example. It empowers voters. So think about that. Just over decades, how many people feel like, hey, I don't fit in the Republican or Democrat box, right? Those candidates don't represent me. Their positions don't represent the vast majority of my positions. Think about how disenfranchised over decades those voters have become, right? Being forced to actually go to vote and vote for the lesser of two evils because none of them really match you. And every decade they have more and more less and less candidates on the ballot that even look like them, sound like them, feel or put priorities on the same things you put priorities on, right? So now when you have a ranked choice voting and you know those two independents, more independents came out in Maine to vote in that election because now they realize I'm not wasting my vote to vote for Tiffany or Will. My vote will actually stay in the process to ensure that the 50% winner, I'm going to end up being the one determining with my second and third place vote who actually wins in that district. That empowers voters. That brings them back out to the polls to now be excited again to want to vote. You might have the parties, you might have Republican and Democrats a little nervous, right? Because now they can't just placate to their base, they have to have a broader appeal, but it really gives voters more choices and gets them more excited. Go ahead.
I'm confused. What if it's the presidential election? You got one Democrat and one Republican and an independent and a green and a whatever. So let's say I vote Democrat, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I going to vote for, number two? Duh.
Whoever your choice is, but, okay, you raise a good question, because when you're thinking through the example, in a lot of elections, in that first round, right, so let's just go back, right, because this is probably how a lot of elections turn out, right, in the first round, right, if you go back to the first round here.
Including likely for the president.
Yeah, even for the president, right, you're probably not going to get the president until across the country have more than 50% in a lot of states, right, they're going to be under 50%. They're going to look like this. So, you know that incentive I was talking about, how the people that need to rank the most, or to ensure that you get enough ranking, the ones that are incented to vote are the ones below the Republican and Democrat line, right? Uh-huh. Your Republican or Democrat will probably end up, in a lot of cases, still being in the top two, right? Especially a lot of the big races. I mean, we're still, even long-term, for as far as we can see, we're going to probably still be a primarily two-party system. What we're trying to do with ranked choice is just loosen the grip, like trying to loosen the grip they have that you only have Republican and Democrat. We need to get more voices, stronger voices into that have power. And what I always say, let's just assume Tiffany was a libertarian, right? So when I go to the libertarians and describe this, I tell them, look, when we implement ranked choice voting, I'm not telling you the Green Party or the Libertarian Party is suddenly going to start winning 10% of elections. But the power that you have as a libertarian is now the two parties now know, hey, none of us are probably going to get 50%. I got to convince the libertarian or the green or the independent voters that are voting for those candidates to vote for me second. I can't be so polarized in how I campaign and the positions that I stand for because I need second place votes. It moderates. It pulls people off those extreme positions or the polarizing way in which they say it or lie that we're all tired of, right? I mean, it stops that negative campaigning, the lying, because they now have to appeal. So what I tell the libertarians is, like, you might not win anymore under ranked choice, but your vote's going to mean a hell of a lot more now. The two top issues that you're important about, and I say libertarian, it can be green, it can be independent, whatever. But what I do say is now Bruce or Jared has to realize, ooh boy, this is going to be tight. What does Tiffany's stand for the most? How can I make sure that I knock on their door and say, hey, I know you're still going to vote for Tiffany, but I want to show you how I am similar to Tiffany, how my top priorities align with Tiffany's. Vote for me second. Imagine that. Never happened. I mean, that's almost unheard of today, but that's what happens in Maine, right? They not only tell you what they stand for, but they try to tell you, hey, okay, I need second and third place votes too. So that's the power of it to some of the independents and third parties, is that, look, maybe you might not win a whole lot more, but the power of your vote now, and your folks will now come out and vote more. They've been disenfranchised for decades. They're going to come out and vote, and their vote's going to mean something. Their vote's going to actually determine who wins. That's powerful, even if your candidates aren't winning a whole lot more.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to add for a point of clarity too, like so in this example right here, at first, because Will for sure can't win, the only votes that you're looking at the second choice for are the people who put Will first. So if you put the Democrat first, we're only still looking at your first vote because they never got eliminated. So if you didn't want to rank anybody else because you do like a Democrat or Republican, your vote's still staying up there because they still have some of the highest percentages. Yeah.
And actually that point is why it's been challenged in federal court, in Maine twice actually, from the Maine side, because Bruce and Republicans didn't like this outcome. Safe to say. So, but what's important about what Katie just said is that your vote, and the reason why it's legal, one vote, one person, is that your vote is never with more than one candidate. It's not like your vote gets distributed 60% to this candidate and 40%. It sits with your first choice and stays there until your first choice is eliminated. Just like in a runoff in Georgia or other states that do a runoff. Like when you come back for a runoff, there's only two candidates to vote for in the runoff. Your previous candidate's been eliminated, now you're forced to vote for the remaining ones. That's what ranked choice does. Your vote at any given part, any round, is only with one candidate until your favorite candidate at the time is eliminated. And the example here is too, like if you look at Tiffany, when Tiffany's votes got broken up, it looks like it's under Tiffany, and most of them are, but some of those colors could have been Will's voters, right? You could have had a Will voter that said, I want Tiffany second, but I want Jared third, right? So some of those would have not just been Tiffany's second choices being redistributed, it would have been Will's voters who said, I want Tiffany second, and then someone else third and got moved as well. So when your top candidate gets eliminated, it goes to your next. When that candidate gets eliminated, it goes to the next. That's the power of ranking. Your voice stays in that process much longer so that when the winner is determined with 50%, way more people participated in the results of that election. Question, quick, go ahead.
So I can see how this works in like a nonpartisan election. Probably the places that you're showing us in Ann Arbor and so on, they probably have nonpartisan elections. I can see how it would work maybe in an open primary. That would probably work if you're looking at Maine. That's a very small state. But if you take a big state like California that has 55 electoral votes, or maybe it's representative, whatever it is, I just can't see how that's going to work. It's going to drag out the counting process. If you're talking about even congressional districts, the political parties are going to fight it tooth and nail. I mean, in Maine, you're using an example where you have a whole lot of independents, but you have strong political parties in a lot of states that
Okay.
I mean, and then you got the whole electoral college.
And we can have that Q&A afterward to kind of go to that. I would have hoped that you would hold out that opinion of what you think will work till we got through the full presentation, right? to hear about it in full. I think we've turned a lot of people. I've been in a lot of presentations with people who have that feeling from the beginning to the end, so I get it. It's the biggest reform in the U.S. It's up to over 50 cities. It's in 2 states statewide. There's 2 more states on the ballot this fall, which is Oregon and Nevada. 2026 is lining up 5 more states, including us, to do this statewide.
New York City has a population of 10 million.
New York City has a population of 10 million, right? So I get, trust me, I know I'm sitting in front of a group that I expect to be skeptical, right? And that's the role I want you to play. I learn more from the skeptics, talking to skeptics, than I do about the people that come up to me afterward and say, I love ranked choice voting. How quickly can we get it, right? I learn more from the people who tell me, hey, I'm a little concerned about this, whatever. So I want a couple of other things. I talked about incentives, less negative campaigning. It's happened in Maine. It's not we think less negative campaigning. It's happening. More issue focused, right? And when you get elected, people compromise more, right? Because remember, if you got elected with ranked choice voting, you have to get reelected with ranked choice voting. 50% is now a higher bar to get reelected. You better do what you said you were going to do when you got on your campaign, because you got to get 50% next time. So it holds elected officials more accountable, because 50% is a higher bar to reach. You're going to lose voters if you don't do what you said. You're not just going to keep your base and keep winning with 35%. Less polarization. I think you kind of get it, right? If you have to moderate and be less polarizing when you're a candidate and when you're an actual elected official, you're going to get less extreme solutions. You're going to get more compromise. You're going to get more results, right? So less polarizing. How many people raised their hand about polarizing? Okay. Reduces the impact of special interests, okay? I got into this even before the gerrymandering because my big thing in politics long term is how do we get money out of politics? I think someone said that back there. We got to get rid of it. Ranked choice doesn't reduce the amount of money in politics. But what it does do is it reduces its impact, right? So nothing is going to cause the candidates in a ranked choice election to raise different money. It's just that when you have to get 50%, right, it reduces the impact of that big donor gave to the candidate to do his special interest thing, because the candidate can't just run on that only and win with 35% anymore. It reduces the impact that money and that big donor can have, because the candidate still has to get 50%. Saves money. Georgia, think Georgia. $70 million. Every single year they do a runoff. They've done a runoff every 2 years for the last 10. Every time. Governor, senator, it's a runoff. It's $70 million to bring it. So, when I get to the cost of ranked choice, it's so easy to justify the cost of ranked choice or whatever the increased cost to implement it to begin with when you're saving $70 million every 2 years, right? So, now Michigan doesn't do a lot of runoffs, right? Like New York City saved a ton of money, but Michigan doesn't have that, so this benefit doesn't probably apply to us quite as much, but that is a big benefit of ranked choice. No more runoffs, no more trying to bring everybody back to the polls again, and you lose 5% of the people who don't come back, right? And voters like it. Every exit poll that they take after voters using ranked choice for the first time, they ask how much they liked it. Big. Like usually, clerks are lucky if they get a 70% or 65% user satisfaction from voters. You're typically in the 75 to 80% user satisfaction coming out of ranked choice. So I had a little video here, but I won't share it for time purposes, of Letitia James, just a minute and a half, talking about when they implemented in New York City, because this is the example I'm going to give you, because I think it really drives the points home. But she talked about for a minute and a half about just the impact it's had to women getting elected and getting more women leaders in New York City, more racially diverse leaders in New York City, and she attributed it to ranked choice voting. I mean, she attributes obviously to good candidates, right? And there were a lot of factors that play into the results I'm going to show you. But at the end of it, she just said it still wouldn't have been this great without us using ranked choice voting and eliminate split voting. So let's talk about that real quick. One of the concerns, and I'll talk about this later because you guys asked about what are some of the disadvantages of ranked choice, right? People are concerned about turnout. You can see the chart there. The very first ranked choice election in New York City had the second highest turnout in its history. It didn't scare people. This is not something that scared people away and, oh, it sounds so confusing. I mean, it does require some education. We'll talk about that, but it doubled. It more than doubled from the previous election, and it was the second highest of all time in New York City. I know this is a small one that only clerks here would probably appreciate. If there's any clerks in the room, by the way? Clerks would appreciate this one, because after I just said how much it went up in New York City for turnout, this doesn't sound that big. It's only 5%. But do you know how much from one to election a 5% changes on how many people actually fill out their complete ballot? Like, you're usually talking about a fraction of a percentage point up and down from election to election, year after year, decade after decade. 5% in one election of ranked choice voting. People not only were excited about ranked choice, but they filled their whole ballot out, right? That's a good metric for people. You know, if you're a group that is supportive of better voting outcomes, right? Getting voters to come in and complete their getting good turnout and completing the whole ballot is two major metrics. I won't cover this in general, and by the way, I'm not going to state causation here, but if you look at all the examples in the cities and the states that have implemented ranked choice voting, all the needles go up. You don't find many going down. Now, I can't stand here and say that's a causation. I can't say only because of ranked choice, because as we all know, and you guys in this group probably know, there's a lot of factors that come into play with voting turnout, right? I mean, the candidate, the issues, I mean, there's just so many things that can play into why voters come out more. But one thing's for sure, that people were worried about just when I started this 5 years ago was, oh, this is going to confuse people and people aren't going to turn out. It's not true. And I don't have to say anything really other than just look at this graph. So I want to talk a little bit about equitable representation. And I want to talk a little bit about the percentages associated to those lines. So in New York City, it's 5 boroughs. They each have 10 council people. That's 50 leaders in New York City, 51 if you count the overall mayor. In the history of New York City, the percentage of those 51 seats that women ever had, the high watermark, the best ever, was 35%. And at the time of their first ranked choice election, they only had 29%. Like before the election, the current was 29%. In the very first ranked choice election, and the bar says it all, women had 52% of the seats in New York City in one election. Now, some of that, as Letitia James, you would have seen on the video, some of that is because more women came out. I mean, there's already a couple years after Me Too, but more women were consistently coming out and running. But as we talked about before, more quality women running doesn't necessarily do them good. Because if women is a voting bloc and you have 2 strong women running, you'll split the vote. That split vote for women and for racial demographics is why New York City did ranked choice voting. They were having voting turnout and disenfranchisement from people of color for decades in New York City because of this split voting concept. So this is an example. Again, I can't attribute this all to ranked choice, but if you look at the graph over time, to have it go from where it was trending to where it went to, and to say that that doesn't have at least a pretty significant impact from ranked choice, it's, can't prove it, but that's the impact it's had. Letitia James felt like that was really the main reason, right? But there's another side to this, right? I talked about why New York City did this, right? Is that on the left was the current makeup of the city council racially. And on the right is the chart that says, okay, here's the racial makeup now after ranked choice voting. You can see less white representation, more people of color representation. And okay, that's a great slide, but the goal of, as Letitia James said, wasn't to just vote in as many Hispanics and blacks as we possibly could. Like, that wasn't the goal of ranked choice voting. The goal was to make it representative of the city. And I got to redo this slide as my PowerPoint skills aren't that great at this level of detail, but I tried to do it a little bit here, where if you look now at the middle bubble, which is the current makeup of New York City now, the real comparison is comparing it to the population of New York City. for the first time in New York City, the makeup of city council, of those 51 seats, now looks like, right, the racial percentages of the city. And that's part of what they were after, right? I mean, you still want good candidates. It's not all about race. But you're trying to eliminate in the districts and the wards that were heavily people of color, just like Katie showed you on District 13 here. This hasn't happened in Michigan a whole lot, but we felt it this cycle. New York's been feeling that Michigan example for decades. And that's what they were going after trying to solve. They weren't looking for how to maximize and put as many people of color or women as possible. They wanted to be more representative. There's no more representative than 52% of women and a racial makeup that looks exactly like the city. In one election, this was the very first ranked choice election. It didn't take a decade to get there. It didn't take 5 cycles of ranked choice. It happened, I mean, I think even they were sort of surprised, thinking like they thought this might take a couple cycles to get to their goal. They did it in one election. It's powerful. So all these disenfranchised communities that weren't voting are now like, I'm excited about voting again, right? And I'll talk a little bit, I can get into this voter satisfaction. I mean, New York City alone was 77%. That's the highest voter satisfaction in the history of the city. They've never had 50, I mean, people hate voting, they hate politics. I mean, you never get people walking out of the voting booth saying, I'm happy with this one. I haven't even seen who won yet, and I freaking hate this, right? So, this is, to get this kind of user satisfaction is pretty incredible. Not to mention the fact that they saved $10 million. Letitia James herself was elected in a physical runoff, which cost the city $10 million. By the way, $10 million is her entire budget. She's the Attorney General in New York City. That is her entire budget for all 4 years of her office. Just to put it in context, right? So I'll talk a little bit about do you want to talk about the problem, or you want me to just?
I can. Yeah.
You're better at this than me.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about ranked choice voting, but we also that's not the whole part of the solution. Like we said, there are multiple aspects to this solution. And so the other part of where we see a lot of this polarization, the incentives being screwed up, why you don't see folks working across the aisle, is our primary system. Again, small percentage of folks who turn out in that primary. I myself am an independent. I'm really glad in Michigan that independents are allowed to actually choose a ballot, but you're only allowed to choose one. You can either choose a Democrat or Republican. And I personally, Ron had mentioned sometimes like independents aren't real. Well, we don't have a lot of independents running as candidates here, but I like looking at what is the quality of every single person running, what's that position, and how are their policies going to impact that position. So who I want for governor might be a different party than who I want for my county official, especially because I live in Kent County. A Republican is going to win no matter what. And so that might not be my top choice for the governor. Again, it might be, I don't know. Depends on who's running. But right now I'm really limited where I can only choose either the Democrat ballot for the primary or the Republican ballot for the primary, instead of being able to vote across those lines. And those candidates, you get only one candidate per party at the final on election day. So I might have had no say in who those candidates ended up being, depending on which ballot I ended up choosing. So you have to kind of do this math of where is my vote going to count more. A lot of our seats in the country, and in Michigan still, we have a lot more competitive seats than we used to, but they're not very competitive once you know whether it's a Democrat or it's a Republican district. So after that primary, whoever was the top Democrat or Republican, they're going to end up winning. And only nationwide, 8% of eligible voters turn out to vote in those kinds of elections. So very small percentage. Young people are at historic levels of declaring themselves as independents. A lot of states don't even let independents vote in the primary, even though tax dollars fund them. Because you aren't a member of that party, you don't get a say in who that party nominates past the primary, is the logic there. But again, then you don't have the majority of what people actually want in a candidate determining who those candidates are. You're just stuck with these very limited options at the end of it. So can we actually do something about this? And that's what we have begun to look at. Yes, you actually can. And ranked choice voting is one of the ways that you can start to do that. But also there's something called Final Five voting, which Alaska has adopted. Nevada's looking at adopting it. But basically, instead of having a single party primary, you have all the candidates on one ballot. And you get to rank the order of those candidates. So you could say, I like a Democrat first, I like an independent second, a Republican third, Libertarian fourth, whatever.
Actually, just to clarify,
Yeah.
in the open primary, it's not ranked, only in the final general.
Oh, sorry.
In the primary, it's just like it is today, and why it's called top 5 is the top 5 vote getters move on.
Yes, thank you.
So the primary part, it's not ranked.
Yes, so you choose your one candidate in the primary, and then based on how everybody voted at the general election, the one that the majority of people show up for, then the top 5 vote getters are on that ballot. And that's where you then get to choose from 5 candidates instead of just 2, basically. And you can then rank them to decide how you want that to look. And so that had really big consequences in Alaska. I think it helps demonstrate it. So Ron, if you want to hop into that example.
Yeah.
Oops. Did I? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you wanted us to help talk about was ranked choice, but you also want to talk about this new concept of open primaries, because a lot of the states are looking at open primaries. So you wanted us to talk about that. And the thing we really want to point out was that open primaries, as they talk about it today, is really just a derivation of ranked choice. You're still using in top 5 or open primaries, like Katie was describing, you're still using ranked choice in the general. So that secret sauce of getting a majority is still part of the solution. But what ranked choice doesn't get at is you can use ranked choice for the primary, which would be our default solution. But part of what this is trying to solve is getting that, how do we get the extreme candidates that keep coming out of these partisan primaries? And part of the goal of doing that is, well, let's open up the primaries to everybody. Like, let's just have, like Alaska does, all the candidates run an open primary and the top 5 vote getters go to ranked choice, right? So if you talk to some of and I think we get this, just talking to it, there's a lot of words on the screen, but what are the benefits of doing an open primary, right? One of the benefits of that is it kind of helps you feel freed from that tyranny of party politics and party sort of primary, right? The second a Republican reaches across the aisle and votes for the Democrat on something, you know that there's some big funder lining up to put someone more extreme than them on the ballot next time to be primaried. Yeah. And I'm using the Republican example, but I hate to tell people in this room that it happens the same on the other side, right? It was the woman in Arizona. She's not even running this time around because she tried to solve the border issue, and all of a sudden, so it happens on both sides, right? That you'll get primaried, but you'll get primaried with a more extreme candidate. That adds to this polarization of extremity going. So Final Five is just a little bit of a variation that helps even do a better job of eliminating the extremes you're getting out of your primaries.
By Final Five, you mean?
The 5 vote getters. So we'll do an open primary. You still run, by the way, as Republicans and Democrats in the primary,
Okay.
but there could be 3 Democrats, there could be 3 Republicans, a couple independents. The top 5 vote getters in the open primary then go to a November ranked choice election.
Okay.
But how
So
do
it's-
you get 50%?
Well, you don't in the open primary, because all the open primary is trying to do is
So the Final Five are ranked.
right, the final 5 are just the top 5 vote getters. So whoever got the 5 most votes, right? They go to the general, and then you use ranked choice in the general to get a 50% winner,
No, thanks.
right? So the primary doesn't get a 50% winner. You're just looking for the top 5. You're just narrowing the field, so to speak, right? So that a voter only has 5 candidates to look at who are the most viable candidates in the ranked choice election. Go ahead.
Okay, before the Final Five, you have an open primary where anybody who wants to be elected can jump in, is that what you're saying?
That is correct, right? So
it's possible you could have 50 people running for office.
it's possible.
They'd still have to meet the qualifications for getting on the ballot, so gather the signatures and follow those pieces.
I happen to remember an election in Detroit where you had 60-some people running for 5 open seats. So I'm sure you could have 100 people running for one particular office. So if it is an open primary, you could have 100 people, I'd say 150, because that is possible.
Yeah.
If anybody can put their money down and say, I want to run for office. You have 150 people, and they're on the ballot for the primary, and then it gets distilled down to the final five, the five top vote getters, and that is what gets to the
November election
November.
that we use ranked choice to get a 50% winner for. So it's still ranked choice. It's still like it's a ranked choice variation. It's just ranked choice, but it's a different primary approach. Yeah. And your example, Mary Peralta in Alaska, I'll show you this example later. In her race, there were over 40 people running for her seat. Right? So instead of 40 people being sent to a ranked choice election and splitting all the vote, you had those 40 people go into an open primary. The top 5 vote getters went to ranked choice. So it still keeps it open for still a lot of people who want to serve, right? It doesn't cause a lot of restrictions for people to get on the ballot or to try to run, but it does help make sure that when you get to the ranked choice part of it, you've narrowed your field to the true viable candidates, right? It's eliminating from the ranked choice process a lot of candidates that are, may not be viable choices. Go ahead.
Wouldn't it be possible for running for governor, you only have 5, you'll have 5 people make it through the open primary, none of them may be Democrat or none of them may be Republicans.
Possible.
I know, I'm just saying.
Theoretically.
It'd be interesting that, yeah.
Theoretically. I mean, so just to sort of go back to some of
But that would be because the majority of people didn't want somebody from that party on it. Yeah.
But still,
Right.
it'd be a first.
It would be changing stuff up.
Yeah. And
There's no
and
guarantee.
The real benefit, and we're talking about this, right? I mean, extremities go down, right? Because you have everybody voting in the primary. You don't have 9% of Republicans voting in the Republican primary for the position and 8% of Democrats voting for the Democratic position, which are sometimes more of your more extreme voters, right? So they're electing more extreme candidates. The whole idea of open primary is to get the whole electorate deciding who do we want even to be our 5 candidates. Again, just an additional level of moderation. So ranked choice moderates, right, in the campaign. Just you're even getting more moderate candidates into that process to choose from to begin with. Willing to compromise, less polarizing, less gridlock, right? I mean, how many, right? Some of the things you talked about earlier, that's what ranked choice together with open primaries helps achieve. So think about it, it's like, open primaries is like ranked choice on a little bit of steroids, right? There's a little more extra bump to get rid of this party politics polarization that's really kind of ripping us apart. We're not trying to get rid of the 2 parties. We're just trying to loosen this extreme power they have where we only get 2 candidates. That's it. Things change when you get more candidates, more voices into the process. So I'm going to talk quickly about these, but I want to leave some time for Q&A. So what I'm going to do on Alaska, because there's just a lot to drain about this, and to be honest, some of it isn't necessary. It's only been 1 election, so I don't have a lot of causational data. I have a lot of sort of correlation data and some of the things that happened. We can't necessarily always 100% attribute it to what happened in Alaska. So I'm going to send some of this stuff out that Maria and others can distribute afterward, right? Some links to this so you can read more about the Alaska example and what happened there. But safe to say in this, right, that more or less what they were trying to achieve to happen happened, just like New York City, right? More Native Americans, more Native Alaskans got elected. More people ran. All the incentives and all the metrics you're looking for better voting, better candidates is what Alaska started to see. Again, hard to tell from just one cycle, and the data isn't as clear as what happened in New York City, where the bar went off the chart that we were showing you, right? But all the trends were similar, so we'll send that to you to look at on your own.
And just as a quick, you might have heard about it in the news because Sarah Palin was kind of one of the folks who was supposed to win and ended up not winning because she ran a really extreme campaign. She was appealing to a solid 34% of Alaskans, but in a really extreme way, in a very right way. And so a candidate who was more moderate was the one who ended up winning because more people liked more moderate policies. And they voted for a Republican first that wasn't Sarah Palin, but they didn't actually want Sarah Palin second. They wanted somebody else because they didn't like that extremity.
Bruce in Maine, Sarah in Alaska, they all dissed ranked choice afterward. And we couldn't have any better endorsement. Okay, so the point is, they couldn't do the same old way of doing politics. They couldn't negative campaign and have that benefit them. They couldn't, all the things that we talked about, dig in, gridlock. You can't do that anymore with ranked choice voting. So they can't use the same power levers they've used for decades. They don't like it. We, voters, love it. Politicians don't like it. So where is it used? Just a quick slide here on just where is ranked choice used, because we didn't hit this. And I just pulled one slide. I mean, ranked choice has been used by many, many countries. Some of over a century have been using ranked. This is not a new concept. This is not some theory we're testing in the United States. Like, this is pretty, I mean, it's new in the US, but it's pretty tried and true and tested. Like, there's not like new things we have to figure out and make up and reinvent the wheel here. Like, places have already done this. They've already learned the pitfalls that we are taking advantage of when we implement ranked choice here. But the point is, and you can see here what states are using it. You can see the statewide states. I mean, look at that little black or the little dark segment down in the south. That's sort of surprising. All those states in the south using ranked choice. If you look at this, if you look at the legend, military and overseas only. Huh. Those states wanted to make sure that when they have their runoff, right? They want to make sure the military overseas, because you can't do you can't get it out, you can't get the runoff ballot out to the military and back in time in that 2-week period to do the runoff. So they do ranked choice, and they've been doing it for decades in those states to ensure that when they do a runoff, they already know all the overseas person who their second and third choice are. So if they do a runoff, they know what the vote. They don't want to lose those people's votes.
Is there some way they
That's
can
all I'll say.
cheat on that? Is there a way to cheat?
With ranked choice, harder to manipulate.
All those armed forces and things, and then they decide they're going to, first of all, you've got to have some kind of, I can't even imagine, the computer that has to be, maybe it's already been built.
Yeah.
That does this thing.
I'm going to address that. That was a similar point she made about how many. Look, it's computer. In Michigan, there's every single voter in Michigan. This isn't like Alaska where like 50% still vote on paper, right? And are still calculated on paper. This is Michigan. Like, we have 3 different election types here. They all do ranked choice. I mean, they have to be tested when they're implemented. They have to be tested to make sure they work right for ranked choice voting. But it's all automated. Ranked choice is calculated as quickly on a computer as as it is for plurality. It's an extra half.
And there's the paper trail. You can still look at.
Yeah, you have all the paper trail, just like we do today. You have machines that scan for errors. Like, if you vote wrong today and made a mistake, you puts in the scanner and the clerks here know this, right? You put in the scanner, it beeps and says you messed up something. Do you want to fix it? And the voter has a choice to redo their ballot.
The computer can actually show everything you're talking about, who got the 50%.
Yeah.
Who gets the not
Yep.
50%. That's
Yep.
amazing.
It automatically calculates it. But to your point, one of the things that's different about ranked choice is you don't get the interim updates, right? It isn't like, oh, 60% is in and here's who's winning. You don't get that in ranked choice. You can't calculate ranked choice until everything is in,
Yeah.
right? So there is a point that you're making about it does take longer to see results because you have to wait for everything to get in, and then you run the ranked choice calculation. It runs instantly, and the results are shown differently. You got to show round by round, right? So who was eliminated first, and how was those votes distributed? You have to show all that visually so the voter feels confident they see, okay, exactly how this played out. But anyway, the point is, ranked choice is actually used, even though it's fairly new. Ranked choice is actually used a lot, and I should have put a slide in here highlighting Oregon and Nevada. They're this year. They're voting on it.
And Nevada's already passed it once, but to amend their constitution, they have to pass it twice before their constitution can be
Yeah, they have a
amended.
weird, yeah. Actually, I think there's there's actually some good things to that, but yeah, they have to pass it twice, which most states only have to pass it once. But
Yeah.
That's the other question, of course, I'm jumping ahead. How
Should I stand up now,
do
too?
we get ranked choice voting in, what's the procedure? on
Yeah.
the Michigan?
yeah, we want to make sure we cover that because I know Katie has to bolt out of here and she wants to talk about that. And I'll come back to the concerns.
Oh, sure.
'Cause
Yeah.
we
I thought
definitely-
we were
I know
at
you guys want to
question
hit on
time.
concerns.
Are we
so-
not at question time yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
Give me
All
1
right.
minute.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I do want to hit on this because I think
Yeah,
it's,
please do.
I think I can do this pretty quick.
Yeah.
I don't want to
I didn't mean to rush you.
not
Sorry.
rush. I don't want to rush through the disadvantages or the concerns because I think they're important. And I broke this slide up into 2 on purpose because some of them still exist, some of them have been debunked. No doubt, and I couldn't put this in big enough font, bold enough, that the number one issue about ranked choice voting is that it's change. There's a cost to change. And those 2 costs are primarily in education. I'll say it again, education. The places that increase turnout, the places that have less votes, less ballots spoiled, are the locations that educate their voters ahead of the first election the best. I mean, New York City probably spent $8 million on the first election, educating the whole city to make sure that when the election came, people knew how to do a rank. That no one was in there like, I don't know what to do. Like, there was a lot of education to make sure, because, most of this, there was only, on each ballot, there was still only 2 seats that were ranked. Every other thing on the ballot for a New York voter was still plurality, right? Like, when you implement ranked choice, it's not like the whole ballot is ranked choice. It's just the positions that are going to ranked choice. So education. Education on just how it works, education on how to vote, and education on how is the winner calculated. That's what people really want to know, right? The ranking, we rank things in our lives every day. Ranking is not a hard concept, right? That's not difficult. What's difficult to people, how does this math work, right? The slides I was showing you and the last person getting eliminated and redistributed, that just requires a lot of education so that people that have some skepticism can see it more and get more comfortable with it and understand how it gets better outcomes and how I do this right. And most importantly, and we would never implement ranked choice in Michigan without this, which is what's holding us up, is that it requires a certified process.
Yeah, well, let's hear it.
Right? All the machines do it, but you got to test it. Right? And just like in plurality voting, if every situation that, unique sort of thing that happens, unusual, you have to have a process for how you deal with that. Same thing in ranked choice voting. So you have to map all that out. You have to make sure the machines, you have to do test runs. You have to certify the whole process so that you're confident when you actually do your first ranked choice election, you're not going to have any errors. And that costs some money, right? There's an initial sort of cost sort of startup. And that's important. And the data has shown the less cities spend on education, the more initial issues they have with rollout with either frustrated voters or, whatever. Like that education is. And then finally, truth. In this time of polarization, what's the biggest concern about ranked choice? Just like almost anything. It's getting the truth out. Getting people, you will give them data and they'll be questioning your data. Because nowadays we're always questioning the data because people are always manipulating it, right? So sometimes the hardest thing is just getting the truth out there, right? And then the other things that I can, showed you already is that historically, before we started doing ranked choice 5-6 years ago, when, no states had it, people were concerned about turnout. That data is now clear, pretty clear. Like, it doesn't impact turnout negatively. Spoiled ballots, right? I think if you actually looked at the data, it's like 0.0004% less. But that's looking at the very first 40 cities that implemented it, right? They're probably taking the brunt of it. And it was still only 0.0004 spoiled ballots less, right? So spoiled ballots now has been like, no, people get it. Machines kick it out if it's wrong, like just like they do today. So, and then finally, candidate knowledge. And that is true. If you have to rank, let's say 5 offices on your ballot, you got to know more candidates. You can't just go in and say, well, I only have 1 vote. I'm voting. I want this woman. Right? Well, now you got to know. Well, if that woman gets eliminated from the process, I got to know who's my second choice, or my voice is going to exit the process. So
Which is why you don't necessarily want it for every single office.
Right.
Because
you want it for your important offices, right? I mean, that's where it really has the impact, right? But hey, candidate knowledge, isn't that something we all should have anyway?
Yes.
Don't we want all of our voters to be more educated and know who the candidates are to make the right choice? And that's something we all strive for anyway. This is what this whole group is probably all about, right? I mean, one of your core principles, right, is...
Yeah, the voter guide.
Yeah, the voter guide, and how do you make... So, those are the things. Some of them still exist, and we have to be conscious of them and address them. Others, I think we have enough data now that the concerns are kind of debunked, that the data shows what we thought would be issues really aren't that bad. Okay, transition, real quick to... You want to talk about, just wrap up?
Sure, yeah, and then we can do questions real quick. So a question was asked, how do we actually make this happen? So you could have the legislature decide to do this, but this, like Ron made pretty clear, takes away power from the parties. And right now, the parties still control what's happening. So it's good to advocate to our legislators and maybe they would pass it. But really the best way forward is a ballot initiative process by writing what would this constitutional language look like, gathering the required signatures and then putting it up to the voters to decide would they want this to be implemented and for what offices. That would have to be part of the constitutional writing process. And so that's what we're, Ranked by Vote has been looking at exploring and understanding who would want this, what would this look like, and trying to see what the support would look like. I think right now is like a really interesting time because it is the presidential election. It's one of those examples you're hearing all the time. Back in 2016, you had two fairly unpopular candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It was Michigan's closest election. 10,000 votes made Donald Trump the president instead of Hillary Clinton. If we had ranked choice voting, would some of those people who voted for Jill Stein or for Gary,
The Libertarian, yeah.
you're the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson?
Gary Johnson.
You know, who would their second choices have been? Maybe it would have been the same exact results. Maybe we still would have had Donald Trump, but we might not have. And that ended up having a really big impact on the entire country. And right now, neither of the two major candidates, either Biden or Trump, are anti-war. A lot of young people want an anti-war candidate, and they're planning to not vote for either of the two main candidates. That might mean that they might have actually preferred Biden or Trump, but somebody else might get elected, again, right here in Michigan, because we're a pretty purple state. And so I just think it's really timely to be talking and thinking about how do we actually make this happen. So it requires a lot of education. We need to talk to people what this is. We need to make sure we're comfortable with it. And it also requires then people who want to go and gather signatures for it and help raise money for it and put it on the ballot if we want to do that. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to add, Ron. But.
So, excuse me, you're saying we have to have like a referendum, we have to have enough people to get it on the ballot, which would change the Constitution?
Yep.
Okay.
And you'd want to change the Constitution because you can do like just a law change, but then the parties can undo that pretty easily. So once you put it in the Constitution, then the only way it changes is if the voters want it to change. And the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, has mentioned that she really likes ranked choice voting, but that she would want the voters to implement it. So we're also getting signals from the state that they're kind of saying, like, we're not necessarily opposed, but if the voters want this big of a change, like, the voters should be the ones driving it. Yeah.
Before you close, I wanted to just bring up some stuff. There was an Alaska League of Women Voters had a newsletter that said 50 League of Women Voter organizations, state and local, have looked at ranked choice voting. And that everyone agreed that it was the right thing to do in terms of improving our elections. All of them. I wrote for the list of them, and they told me they unfortunately couldn't provide it because the person who wrote the column had gone, quote, off the grid for a period of undetermined months.
And
A list of 8 of the states I found the rules.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes. And I know League of Women Voters, before making an issue determination, do their research too. So, and again, that's what you see in all these countries who've implemented it, is it gives less control to the parties. Yeah.
What offices? I was thinking of all the way down the ballot. So
Yes, we're.
president, and then what offices would be ranked?
I mean, it's something we need to work out with the coalition partners that we want to, like, that we would join, right, to go after this. We need to get all that input. But what we're thinking going in is that it would be presidential, your federal seats. So that's very similar to Alaska and Maine. Like, they started out
Senate and Congress.
by doing, your federal seats and your president. But we would think that we would probably put a schedule in place that we would start with some of those, and then we would get to maybe the top 5 statewide seats, right? So your attorney general, your secretary of state, your governor, so on. And then eventually, and I think this is probably as far down as we would go, is get to the state seats, right? So the state senate and the state republic, we might not do all that out of the gate. We might do a schedule where maybe the first 6 years we do the top positions and people get used to it, and then we roll it out to more. But the thing we want about this too is to make sure that it clears what are current roadblocks for cities to do it, even though cities 5 in a row, 5 out of 5. Just want to point that out again. 5 out of 5. Our test is saying people want this, right? So we want to make sure that also not only is it mandated for those top seats, but also if any city says, hey, they raise their hand, they do a vote, and they want to do this, they can implement it, right? But even in cities, it's not going to be for dog catcher, right? You're going to do it for the mayor, and you're going to do it for probably your city council. I mean, that's what the focus of it would be. And the last thing I'll say, before I know you need to scoot, there's no coincidence, Katie, like I have usually been doing this by myself for a long time. There's no coincidence that Katie is with me today because obviously, as we start to go from doing cities, and we haven't done big ones, I mean, I guess Kalamazoo is fairly big, Ann Arbor is pretty big, but like as we start thinking about going statewide, we need a little extra juice, right? We need someone who is working with us more directly to help guide us to how do we do that right. This, passing it in the state is not like passing it in Ann Arbor. So part of the reason why Katie has offered her time to help is kind of help us strategize through that of what do we need to do by this date, these dates, how do we put a plan together for how we can be successful, because there's been a lot of success here in Michigan with Katie, because of Katie, and for other, voters not politicians, and promote the vote in a lot of other groups. But how can we form coalitions with them and bring people on who've done this and been successful so that we can be successful in implementing it as well?
And make sure it's what the people of Michigan want. I think that's ultimately even the beauty of the ballot initiative process is like,
they tell you.
Yeah, the people get to decide. Yeah.
So besides money, I'm sure you need money, what else can we do right now when we leave here?
Yes, we definitely need volunteers. So rankmyvote.org, or I don't know if there's a way to partner with a league chapter or not, but talking to people about this, like it just took us an hour, a little over, to explain. There's faster ways to do it too, but I really think just helping people understand what it is, because like Ron said, one of the biggest discouragements is anything that's different, people automatically want to shoot down, or they think somebody's trying to pull something over their eyes or whatever. And so I think just letting people get comfortable and understand what this is would be huge. And so if you want to present on it or get familiar with the materials, we'd be happy to connect you with that.
Oregon, Nevada, Maine, you saw the Maine example, like the material came from the League of Women Voters in Maine, right? So I'm not going to even try to sugarcoat this. Like, ultimately, one of the biggest things we can do from this group is, whatever we need to do to get you more knowledgeable, get you the data that you need, your endorsement's pretty powerful.
Extremely powerful.
Right? And Michigan's a little tougher because it's not quite as centralized as other states where, people from around the state will get together and they'll endorse it as a state. That's not how the league works here in Michigan, right? It's sort of county-based, it's sort of decentralized. But hey, you get Oakland, you get Wayne, you get Washtenaw endorsing it, all the others will come. So if you ask me what we can do, at an individual level, yes, sign up, follow us, right? Volunteer, donate, like all that, yes, please. But if I were to say, what am I really getting at with this group, is that we want to make sure that we can get to the point where what do you need to say we endorse this? Because, boy, there isn't nothing that'll change our slope of progress than at the date that the League of Women Voters in Michigan endorses it. Right?
It's very true.
That line changes. So, yes, at an individual level, those things will help. But boy, as a group, getting you guys to endorse this changes our trajectory fast.
You just watch us work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As a longtime league member and having worked on a lot of issues that went nowhere, transportation being a big one, I've seen a lot of efforts fail and fail and fail again. And I would think, I support ranked voting, but I would think that if local areas did school board elections and city council elections, where you have a lot of candidates running, and it works, I think we'd have a better chance of getting it on the state ballot to amend the Constitution. But going big like this, and you talk about Maine, wonderful, and some other states, wonderful. But if you see it with your eyes, that in Farmington Hills we had 8 candidates for 3 seats, and how ranked voting worked, it's a much better sales pitch than talking about other states.
Yeah, we totally agree. And
That's why I
sorry.
would disagree with the approach that you're saying about getting support of the leagues. That it didn't work for so many other issues, but seeing with your own eyes, I think is a better
That gets back to the
sales
amendment.
pitch.
We'd love to do that, but
Yes.
without doing an amendment to the Constitution, we're not going to get it implemented. They won't implement
I
it.
think we
I'm
also
saying
have to
you
look
won't
at all
get it.
the League of Women Voters have supported that have been successful.
I
Let's not
agree.
think about the negatives, let's think positive.
I am thinking positive,
Good.
and I want it to happen. And you don't need to change the Constitution for the city of Farmington Hills to do ranked voting for the city council or no-vi for the school board.
So unfortunately you do. So 5 cities have passed it, but right now there's a discretion, basically, where the Secretary of State's office hasn't created that certified process for clerks to use to implement it. There's a couple state statutes that they think conflict with it, even though our state constitution says that cities should be able to vote in the way that they want to. So somebody needs to potentially bring a lawsuit. The League of Women Voters could possibly bring a lawsuit. I know you did that for redistricting, to clarify that, because until that, even with these cities that have passed it, overwhelmingly, they actually aren't even using it yet. That being said, we are still trying to help more cities pass it so that once we could get something statewide passed, it could be enabled right away. So if anybody was interested locally in doing that, but unfortunately, that's why we're also looking at, okay, can we just go and do a constitutional amendment even so those cities can start implementing it?
I mean, that has
because
been
it costs money for the Secretary of State's office to do it too, so they don't have a lot of incentive unless they either get sued or.
I mean, the truth is, what you're saying is what Katie and Jamie and others who are advising us for 5 years now have said from the very beginning. Like, you got to test it. First, by getting voters telling you they want it, and then preferably implementing it, and then you can show people want it and it works, right? Now, one example we didn't get it because I don't really talk about this a lot. East Point did it for 3 cycles. Does anyone know that? Raise your hand if you know East Point did ranked choice voting. I know you know. Yeah.
How did they do it?
Well, unfortunately, in East Point, there's been a lot of discrimination over decades. And there was a lawsuit brought, the feds came in and said, whatever you're doing has been clearly discriminatory. And what did the feds say is the number one way to eliminate discrimination? They forced them to use ranked choice voting. Now, that was grandfathered, so they were only used 6 years or 3 cycles. And then after that, the voters, or Michigan would have to have adopted it, or the voters adopted it. But that time ran out. We still had really good data on the voters wanting to keep using it. But the city council, there was some backlash from some of the cities, and they decided, well, since the state won't let us do it anyway, why should we vote to keep doing it? Because now that the dissent decree is over, there's no sort of legal sort of shield to it. So to prove your point, we can look at East Point, and Jamie has said this too when we talk to voters, not politicians, like, well, it would be great to go prove it. Well, we did it for 3 cycles in East Point. They used it. They elected their very first black mayor in the history of their city with ranked choice voting. Like, that's how powerful it is. But that's the challenge we have. So we actually have proven it, but we have to get the state to force, because it's not just changing the laws to ensure that it's legal and you certify it. You need money to certify it. Like, Benson doesn't have $500,000 probably just lying around, right? And the clerks are overwhelmed now. Those that are clerks, if there are any clerks in here, right, they're overwhelmed with all the stuff they're implementing now from the last couple of cycles of voter reform and so on. So they're pretty overwhelmed. So, right, they're not in the right time or have the right money. And part of what the amendment would do, just like it did for the anti-gerrymandering, is it would get rid of anti-gerrymandering, but it also allocated funds in perpetuity to make sure that independent commission would keep going. And that's what ranked choice needs. Like, we need to not only pass it and make sure it's legal and change whatever laws or barriers, we also need to make sure we have some funds to just get it implemented.
Partially to your point too, though, even though it's not the exact same thing, but we have seen in other states, and even with some of the city campaigns, doing events where you do have example ballots for people to do right then. I know the league hosts candidate forums. Like, I don't know if that would be something you could do or not, but having people really use it and see how simple it is super effective. So even if we couldn't maybe get a city formally adopting it, I think there's lots of education, like fun ways we could do it that way.
I guess the point is when you try to write an amendment or for the ballot for people to sign, it's going to be hard to say what level of offices you're working on. You can't say just this and say, oh, by the way, we're going to do this later. I mean, that will be a tricky wording concept.
No, we know that, and we haven't. I mean, we know conceptually what we'd like it to include, but then, the good lawyers need to get involved and say, how do we write this appropriately? And then the PR firm has to get in, how do we explain this appropriately, right? So there's a lot of different factors that have to come together, and those two need a lot of money, lawyers and PR folks. So, but I mean, we are at that point where we start forming a coalition. I think the coalition is going to get together and say what makes the most sense.
And listening to people at town halls or like meetings like this too, and what people actually want and what they feel like would be the right offices where they would want to rank that many people, or that many people actually run. That's another part of it. Yeah.
So it would be helpful if you could be clear about a timeline. Maybe that's like a second presentation.
Yeah, high level. Yeah.
Because right now, you've convinced me, but I'm not convinced that you have a timeline or a clear process. So next time you can tell us that.
Yes, we will. We will. I will say that the plan right now, or what is being heavily considered, is looking at 2026, which would require a signature gathering in 2025. It would require us finishing kind of the constitutional language probably by the end of this year. But we've got to kind of get those other pieces in line too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's at a high level. That's what we're looking at. And again, this topic, like gerrymandering or other topics, takes a little more absorption. It's not like an amendment for abortion. Like, you don't have to explain anything. I'm on or I'm not on, right? With gerrymandering or with ranked choice voting, it does take some time. You need to be on the ballot a year ahead of time. You need to campaign for a year and educate. It's a topic that needs a lot more in person, a lot more explanation, a lot more answering of questions. The folks that are a little bit not sure, like the woman in the room was before, like, they need more time to understand and have their questions answered. It's not like the abortion thing where it's like, I know the answer in 2 seconds, right? So.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Anyone wants to stay, by the way, I'll stay till as long as you want to stay to answer questions.
Just a quick suggestion. The League of Women Voters, for their group that is working to end the Electoral College in one way or the other, has a one-pager that's in the back here. It's really well done.
Oh, great.
It really has all the good points. It's easy to explain to somebody by showing them that. Do you have a one-pager that is really self-explanatory, that can be passed around, so that those of us who do support this can talk to people casually and go, hey, there's this?
We do. We have in the past. I think what we've agreed to, though, is now that we're re-strategizing and we're starting to think, okay, passing more cities is a very small incremental return anymore. Like, we need to start thinking about a bigger strategy and statewide. I think we need to answer some questions about that, because part of what has to be on that informational flyer, because you're making the point, right? What's the plan, right? We need to make sure that what we put on that flyer is that we're committed to, right? So that we can show you, not only summarize why it's good, how it works, what the benefits are, but also say, here's our plan. So we want to finalize that.
But super good advice, and we are on it.
And
like
we're on it.
100%.
No, totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Well, we had a really nice little one for Prop 2.
We did, yeah.
A little informative thing. We used it all the time with the elevator speech. We could just, those of us who were talking about it, we could explain what gerrymandering was in a minute and a half.
Yes.
As people walk by at an art show.
Totally. And that's some of the stuff, too, that if you're good at that kind of thing, like, we definitely are using volunteers that way, too, as we're kind of gearing up.
How many people know Kevin Deegan Krause, by the way? So Kevin Deegan Krause was a big presenter of, I think he had the Lego, wasn't he the Lego guy?
Yeah.
That used to come with the Legos and explain it. I mean, over half the slides that you saw today were created by Kevin, right? So Kevin is I wouldn't say the whole country, but probably in the Midwest, he's probably the renowned sort of professor in the Midwest on election systems in the world. So we went to him and said, there's no better person that can explain this and walk through this and talk about the benefits than Kevin. So everything that I know has pretty much come from Kevin.
Was there one other question? Yeah.
Maybe I missed something, but you said something about East Point used it, but why can't the other 5 cities use it?
So because it was a dissent decree and the feds forced it, Michigan didn't have time, because what you would normally do is to implement, you would say, okay, does this bump against any statutes? Are we legal in doing this? And Michigan kind of came back and said there are a couple of statutes here that might be violated if we actually just did this. So the dissent decree gave them cover legally to do it without worrying they were bumping against some statutes. And what they basically said was, if you want to continue doing this, you got to eliminate those bumps by the time the dissent decree is over, which didn't happen. Right? So the state didn't take those actions to ask the legislature to make a few changes to statutes to allow ranked choice and make it totally legal. Because we don't want to do that. We don't want to implement ranked choice either. I mean, that'll be the worst case scenario, us doing ranked choice voting and then knowing that we bumped across a couple statutes and it would make the complete election results invalid. Right? We want to have that road cleared. We don't want to, that's the worst press you can get is, you do it and then you find out it was legally challenged and it wasn't even,
So East tried it in Michigan?
Well, in 1975, Ann Arbor did it. Elected their first black mayor. Very student sort of centric, because, you know, it was 1975. Some interesting times. But after that election, the city council got taken over by Republicans. So in the next cycle, the council turned over to more Republican-led, and they voted it back out. So Kalamazoo in the 20s, actually used ranked choice and passed ranked choice. They did it for 3 cycles. Depression hits, times get hard, the 2 parties kind of regain their footing and their power, voted it back out. So yes, East Point was the most recent one, but Michigan actually has a pretty decent history compared to a lot of states of having people liking it, voting it in, using it. But, you know, for whatever reasons, when the powers to be, then, you know.
That's why we need an amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah.
So that it's the clearest, or it's the quickest and clearest way to just make it legal and make it so that you could actually use it. Yeah.
550.
It's a ton of work. It's a lot of money. I wish that our legislature, you know, just did stuff that the people wanted, but we're getting there slowly, and this will help clear that path in the future too for more laws to just.
And culturally here in Michigan, that's what volunteers want to do anyway. Out of those 550 I spoke to, volunteers in the last 4 years, over half of them are people that, you know, they volunteered for a short period of time and said, call me back when you go for a statewide amendment. Like, that's our culture here in Michigan. Like, people don't want to mess around trying to convince a legislature for 2 years to get behind something only to have them not, you know, get voted out next year and they're back to square one. Like, volunteers in Michigan are like, I don't want to mess around with all this stuff. Like, let's just quick and easy, get it passed.
Still a lot of work.
Easy maybe was the wrong word, but like, the point is volunteers want to just, they don't want their work to be for nothing 3 years later. They want to just do it, get it done, and we solved it, you know, so.
I don't want you to go yet, but before we lose more folks, because of time.
Yeah.
Could you give us an idea of how we can stay up to date with your organization? So,
Totally.
Because it is difficult to comprehend the concept in
1 hour.
any 1 hour. It just is. And I know we will all have questions.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is, to answer Jerry's question, and we do this for most of our presentations, is I will send you a link to our presentation. I'll send you a link to, like, Fair Vote is the national group that keeps a lot of data on this. A lot of the slides we get come from Fair Vote. So I'll send you a lot of good information on where to do it. One of them will be a link to our website. It says if you want to follow us and get a monthly update on what our progress is and what's going on, you just sign up for our newsletter. Like, that's the simplest thing to do for as an individual.
It's Rank My Vote. So our rank and then mivote.org.